Un lived in a small wooden cabin at the edge of a great forest, not far from the mountains where the Red Dragon Pack was said to roam. People in the nearby village always warned him to stay away from the Dragonlands, saying the dragons were fierce and dangerous, that anyone who went too close could disappear forever. Most humans were afraid even to look at the mountains, but Un had never been afraid. He respected the dragons just as he respected the forest, the rivers, and the mountains themselves. To him, the world belonged to every living creature, not just humans. Every morning, Un would wake before the sun, when the forest was still quiet and mist curled between the trees. He liked those early hours. The birds would begin their songs, the dew would shine like tiny stars on the grass, and the cool air smelled of pine and earth. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he could hear faint, high-pitched cries from the mountains. They were soft at first, almost like whispers carried across the distance, but he always knew what they were: baby dragons. Crying somewhere high on the rocky slopes, Ewan had never tried to climb into the mountains. He knew it was dangerous, and he did not want to get in trouble. But he also knew that the young dragons sometimes needed help. The pack could be strict, and the mountains could be unforgiving. If a hatchling fell or became too weak, there might be no one to care for it. And sometimes, he felt a strange pull in his heart, a mixture of curiosity, compassion, and a quiet desire to help whenever he heard those cries. One cold evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky with red and orange streaks, Yuan took his usual walk through the forest. He carried a small satchel filled with food he had prepared for the forest animals. It was nothing fancy: pieces of bread, a little meat, some berries, but he always left them near the streams and clearings, hoping the animals would find them before the night grew to dark. As he walked, he heard the familiar faint cries again, louder this time. Something about the sound made him stop. It was closer. The cries were small, weak, and frightened, unlike the strong calls he usually heard from the pack. Following the sound carefully, Yuan moved through the thick trees and over uneven ground. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil and branches brushed his arms, but he did not mind. His focus was entirely on the small, trembling noises that led him deeper into the forest. After a few minutes, he reached a small clearing near the base of a rocky hill. And there, huddled under a pile of broken branches and leaves, were two tiny red dragon hatchlings. Their scales were damp with rain, their eyes half closed with exhaustion, and their small bodies shivered uncontrollably. They were no bigger than a large dog, but Yuan could already tell that if they were left here through the night, they might not survive. Aaron's heart ached. He had always loved dragons from a distance, but seeing them so small and helpless made him feel something he could not ignore. He knew the stories: humans taking dragons, dragons attacking humans, but he could not leave them here. No matter the danger, he had to help them. He kneeled slowly, making sure not to frighten them, and spoke softly. "Don't worry, little ones. I won't hurt you," he said, his voice steady but gentle. One of the hatchlings lifted its tiny head slightly, staring at him with large amber eyes. Its small wings twitched, and a faint hiss of fear escaped its throat. Ina extended his hand slowly. "I just want to help you. You're safe with me." The hatchling hesitated for a moment, then slowly crawled onto his palm. Its body was so light and fragile that Un could feel every heartbeat, every tiny breath. The second hatchling followed a few seconds later, curling into the warmth of his jacket. En wrapped them carefully, making sure they were comfortable and protected. His cabin was not far from here, and he knew it would be a safe place for the night. He carried them back through the forest, treading carefully over roots and rocks. The hatchlings were quiet now, leaning against him, trusting him in a way that amazed him. He could feel the rhythm of their tiny hearts, the faint heat of their bodies, and he realized that these creatures, though small, were already strong in spirit. Even the most ferocious dragons began their lives this way: teeny, dependent, and vulnerable. When Un reached his cabin, he made a soft bed near the fireplace using blankets and a few soft furs he kept for cold nights. He placed the hatchlings gently on the blankets, ensuring they were warm and comfortable. They curled up next to each other, their tiny tails entwined, and closed their eyes as if they knew for the first time that they were safe. Ian watched them for a while, feeling a strange mix of pride, relief, and awe. He had never cared for a dragon before, but he felt a connection that he could not explain. The night fell quickly. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and the sounds of the forest seemed louder than usual. Ian kept the door closed and the fire burning, and he sat quietly by the hatchlings, watching them sleep. Every so often, one would stir, stretch a tiny wing, or let out a soft chirp. And Yuan would speak softly to it, reassuring it without touching too much. He did not want to frighten them. For hours he stayed awake, keeping watch, listening to the wind and the distant sounds of the mountains. He thought about what might happen if the red dragon pack came looking for their young. He knew dragons were powerful and intelligent, and he hoped they would understand that he meant no harm. But for now, he focused only on the hatchlings, on keeping them safe and warm. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him. Carefully, he lay down on the floor beside the blankets, making sure the hatchlings were comfortable. One crawled onto his chest, seeking warmth and safety. The other nestled beside his side. Yuan closed his eyes for a few minutes, feeling the gentle weight of their tiny bodies and the rhythm of their breathing. In that moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the world was wild and dangerous, but inside, there was a fragile, perfect peace. It was a quiet night, but Un knew that this was only the beginning. The red dragon pack would notice the missing hatchlings soon, and the future was uncertain. But he did not regret his choice. Helping these tiny lives, even for one night, felt like the most natural thing in the world. And as he drifted into a light sleep, he thought that maybe, just maybe, this night would change more than just his life. The morning light crept slowly into Aaron's cabin, casting soft golden streaks across the wooden floor. The forest outside was waking, the leaves shimmering under the sun, birds singing in small bursts, and a gentle wind moving through the trees. Ian stirred from his sleep, stretching his arms and feeling the warmth of the fire that still glowed faintly. But before he could open his eyes fully, he felt the soft weight of movement on his chest. The hatchlings had moved during the night. One of them was curled comfortably against his chest, its tiny head resting near his collarbone. Its wings twitched as it shifted slightly, still half asleep but already filled with the strange trust that only came from feeling safe. The other hatchling had nestled at his side, one small claw resting gently on the blanket, eyes closed. Yuan blinked slowly, a small smile forming on his face. He could feel their tiny bodies breathing steadily, and he knew they had survived the night. He carefully lifted the hatchling from his chest, placed it back on the soft pile of blankets. "Good morning," he whispered softly. "You're safe. I promise." The dragon blinked slowly at him, letting out a small, almost musical chirp, and curled back into the warmth of the blankets. Un laughed quietly. There was something magical about these creatures, the way they breathed. The subtle heat radiating from their bodies, the quiet trust in their eyes. It made him feel like he was part of something larger than himself, something alive and delicate and wonderful. But as he looked outside the window, his smile faded slightly. Uno knew the red dragon pack would notice the missing hatchlings soon. He had spent years learning about the dragons, their strength, their intelligence, and their deep sense of family. They were not cruel, but they were fiercely protective. A human taking their young, even unknowingly, could be seen as a betrayal, and he had no idea how they would react. The sound of wings flapping reached him faintly through the morning air, a distant rhythm that made his heart beat faster. He could almost feel the pack moving in the mountains, sensing that something was wrong. Yuan had to think quickly. He needed a plan to protect the hatchlings, but also to avoid provoking the pack. He decided to stay calm, knowing that any sudden movement or noise might frighten the hatchlings or draw unwanted attention. He prepared a small breakfast for the little dragons, using the food he had brought from the village earlier. Small pieces of soft bread, some berries, and a little water in a shallow bowl. The hatchlings pecked at the food slowly, testing it, and Un watched patiently. He knew that if he rushed them, they might refuse to eat, and he needed them strong for whatever was coming. Slowly, they began to eat more confidently, and he felt a small sense of relief. While they ate, Yuen thought about the pack. He had read stories about the red dragons, how they were intelligent, how they could sense emotions, and how they communicated with each other over great distances. He knew that once they realized the hatchlings were gone, they would come looking, and they would not come quietly. Their presence would be unmistakable, the ground shaking as their massive bodies moved, the air heavy with the scent of their scales. Yuen tried to imagine what would happen if the pack arrived. He could not fight them. He was only human, and the red dragons were enormous, powerful creatures. But maybe he thought they could understand that he meant no harm. Maybe if they saw that he was caring for the hatchlings and keeping them safe, they would trust him instead of attacking. He had to hope, because there was no other option. Hours passed, and the hatchlings grew stronger. Their eyes opened wider, their wings stretched occasionally, and they chirped softly, exploring the blankets and the small area around the fire. Yuen continued to watch them, talking quietly, moving gently, making sure not to startle them. He felt a deep connection growing, a sense that these tiny creatures were beginning to see him not just as a stranger, but as someone who could be trusted then. Far in the distance, a shadow passed over the forest. Yuen looked up instinctively. At first, he thought it was a cloud, but then he saw the unmistakable outline of dragons in the sky. Wings as wide as small buildings, scales reflecting the sunlight in shades of red and gold, moving with strength and precision. His heart pounded in his chest. The red dragon pack had arrived. He watched as the dragons circled above, scanning the forest. Their cries echoed across the trees, sharp and commanding. Aaron's mind raced. He could see their leader, a massive dragoness with scales so bright they seemed to catch fire in the sunlight. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of purpose. She was searching for her young, and her presence filled the forest with tension. Un knew he had only moments to act. He gathered the hatchlings carefully, holding them close, and moved to the center of the cabin, making sure he would be visible if the dragons approached. He did not want to hide. Hiding might be seen as guilt or fear. Instead, he hoped to show them that he was calm and that the hatchlings were safe with him. The dragons landed around the cabin slowly, their massive claws leaving deep impressions in the soft soil outside. The leader stepped forward, flames curling faintly from her nostrils, and let out a roar that shook the air. In froze, holding the hatchlings tightly. His voice was calm as he spoke, even though his heart raced. "I found them," he said softly. "They were alone, weak, and cold. I didn't mean to take them from you. I just wanted to help." The leader tilted her head, studying him. Her eyes were sharp, penetrating, and full of questions, and felt as if she could see into his very thoughts, reading every intention in his heart. The other dragons watched silently, wings spread, bodies tense. It was a moment of delicate balance. One wrong move, and the situation could become dangerous. But then something unexpected happened. One of the hatchlings chirped softly, then moved toward Aaron's chest, curling up in the warmth of his shirt. The leader watched in surprise. The baby dragon, instead of returning to its mother immediately, had chosen the human's warmth and protection. Un held it gently, whispering reassurances, and the other hatchling followed suit. Leaning against him, for a moment the tension lifted. The leader lowered her head, carefully nudging the hatchling, testing the human's intentions. Yuen stayed still, showing no fear, only care and patience. Slowly, the leader realized that this human was different. He had not harmed the hatchlings. He had not tried to take them for his own gain. He had only provided safety, warmth, and care when the young dragons needed it most. The other dragons watched closely, their wings folding slightly, their posture relaxing just a little. Aaron's calm and honest presence seemed to speak louder than words. He had shown something that few humans could respect: empathy, and the courage to care for creatures far larger and stronger than himself. Even when their parents might see him as a threat, Un knew that this was only the beginning. The leader's trust would take time, and he would need to continue showing patience and care. But he also felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could bridge the gap between humans and dragons. Maybe he could show them that not all humans were dangerous, that some could be gentle and trustworthy, even with creatures as powerful as them. As the day went on, the red dragon pack did not leave. Instead, they circled around the cabin, observing quietly. Un continued to care for the hatchlings, feeding them and talking softly, making sure they remained calm. Occasionally, he would glance up at the dragons outside, meeting their watchful eyes, and he could sense a quiet acknowledgement, a silent understanding, that this human was not their enemy. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Un felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had survived the first encounter, but he knew the days ahead would require patience, understanding, and courage. The red dragon pack was powerful and intelligent, and they would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But for now, he focused only on the hatchlings, on keeping them safe and showing the dragons that his intentions were pure. As evening approached, In settled the hatchlings on the blankets again, their tiny bodies warm and content. He sat nearby, watching the fire flicker and the shadows dance on the walls, listening to the soft movements of the dragons outside. He knew the night would be long and the pack's presence would be constant, but he felt ready. He had taken a step into a world of dragons, trust, and unexpected responsibility, and he was determined to honor it. For the first time, he realized that the bond between humans and dragons could be built not on fear or dominance, but on patience, care, and the quiet strength of kindness. The ground trembled slightly under Aaron's feet as he watched the red dragon pack circle the cabin. Their enormous wings cut through the morning air with a quiet power, stirring the leaves and sending ripples through the small stream nearby. Aaron's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that sudden movements or panic could startle the hatchlings or provoke the dragons outside. From his window, he could see them clearly now. Each dragon was massive, their scales shining in shades of red, copper, and gold under the sunlight. Their eyes were bright, intelligent, and watchful, scanning the forest for any sign of weakness or deceit. At the front of the pack, the leader Sereth Azun had learned from stories landed, gracefully despite her size, the earth shaking slightly with the impact of her claws. She let out a soft, low rumble that carried across the forest. A warning to any who might approach, Yuen held the hatchlings close, feeling their tiny bodies trembling against his chest. The firelight from the cabin flickered across their smooth, reddish scales, highlighting the delicate features of their young faces. They were small, fragile, and utterly dependent on him right now. And yet they were dragon's creatures with strength and courage in their very blood. He felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Slowly he moved to the center of the cabin, making sure he was visible to any dragons that might peer through the windows or doors. He spoke softly, trying to keep his voice calm and gentle. "I didn't mean to take them," he said quietly. "They were alone, weak and cold. I just wanted to help." His words hung in the air, sincere and steady, carrying the truth of his heart. Outside, Sereth tilted her massive head, her amber eyes narrowing slightly as she listened. Her nostrils flared, faint smoke curling into the air, and the other dragons watched closely. They could sense the human's intentions, and they could feel the small, delicate pulse of the hatchlings he held. Ian could almost feel their eyes on him, weighing him, judging him, and yet he did not move. He stayed calm, holding the hatchlings close, letting them feel his steady heartbeat. The first dragon let out a low growl, rumbling through the forest like distant thunder. Unfroze, unsure if the growl was a warning, a test, or a signal to the pack. But he did not flinch. He only tightened his hold on the hatchlings, whispering softly to them, "It's okay, you're just watching, you're safe." The hatchlings shifted slightly, curling closer to him, their trust unwavering despite the massive, intimidating presence surrounding them. Sarah stepped closer to the cabin, her massive claws leaving deep impressions in the soft soil outside. The other dragons fanned out behind her, forming a circle around the small building. Un could hear their wings rustling as they adjusted their positions, the sound like a soft storm above him. His heart raced, but he reminded himself to breathe slowly, to remain calm. Any sign of fear or panic could change everything. Carefully, Yuen opened the door a few inches, enough to make himself visible without fully exposing the hatchlings. The light from the morning sun spilled into the cabin, illuminating his face and the small dragons in his arms. Sirith's eyes locked onto him instantly, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Her wings shifted slightly, casting a shadow that danced across the cabin floor. She lowered her massive head, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the scent of her young, then the scent of Yoon. For a long moment, there was silence. The only sounds were the soft chirping of the hatchlings, the distant rustle of the forest, and the faint crackle of the fire. Anne held the hatchlings steadily, showing no fear, only care. He did not try to hide them, and he did not speak any more than necessary. He simply waited, hoping that his sincerity would be understood. Then, something remarkable happened. Of the hatchlings, the smaller of the two lifted its head and let out a tiny musical chirp. It looked at Sereth for a moment, then turned back to Uan and nuzzled into the warmth of his chest. The other hatchling followed suit, crawling closer and curling its tiny wings around him. Aaron's heart swelled. These small creatures had chosen him not because they had to, but because they trusted him. Sirius's eyes widened slightly, and the rumble in her throat softened. She lowered her head closer to the doorway, her massive jaws only inches from Yuen, but she did not strike. She nudged the hatchling gently with her snout, testing, watching. The hatchling chirped again, unconcerned, and shifted slightly in Aaron's arms. The human did not flinch. He held the young dragon carefully, whispering reassurances, his face calm and steady. The other dragons observed silently. They're massive. Heads turned, wings folding slightly as they studied the scene. There was a sense of disbelief in the air. Humans had always been distant, unpredictable, sometimes harmful to dragon hatchlings. And yet, here was one who had done nothing but care, protect, and nurture. Their young had chosen him over returning. Immediately to the pack, a sign that he was different. An realized that the moment was delicate. Any sudden movement could frighten the hatchlings or provoke the pack. He continued to speak softly, even though Sirius's gaze was fixed on him. "I will not hurt them," he said. "I will take care of them until you are ready to have them back. I only want them to be safe." Sirius's massive head lowered a little more. She could feel the warmth of her hatchlings, the steady heartbeat of the human, and the gentle strength in his hands. Slowly she stepped back a few inches, as if acknowledging that he was not a threat. Ian felt a small surge of hope. Perhaps she could understand that his intentions were pure. Time passed slowly. The hatchlings shifted in Aaron's arms, stretching their tiny wings and chirping softly. The other dragons relaxed their stances. Slightly, their wings folding a little more, their heads lowering. Sereth remained watchful, but there was no aggression, now only careful observation. An took a deep breath, letting the tension in his body ease slightly. He knew this was only the first step, but it was a critical one. Trust had begun to form, fragile and new. Une could feel the weight of responsibility more than ever. These were not just any creatures. They were dragons, the most powerful beings in the forest. And yet here they were, allowing him to care for their young. He could not fail them. He spoke to the hatchlings gently, letting them know that they were safe, that nothing would harm them while he was near. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind softened, the birds quieted, and even the stream seemed to slow its rushing. It was as if the entire forest was aware of the delicate moment unfolding at the cabin. An held the hatchlings, feeling their trust and warmth. And he realized that he had never felt such a deep connection with any living creature before. Hours passed in this careful balance. Moon fed the hatchlings small pieces of bread and berries, and they ate slowly but confidently. The dragons outside continued to watch, moving occasionally but never leaving the perimeter. The pack seemed to be waiting, testing him silently, seeing if he would falter. And Un, aware of every eye and every movement, remained calm, steady, and patient. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Un felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had survived the first encounter. He had not panicked, he had not harmed the hatchlings, and he had not provoked the pack. Trust had begun to grow fragile, but real. He placed the hatchlings back on the soft blankets near the fire, letting them rest for a while. One crawled onto his chest again, seeking warmth, and he held it gently, whispering words of comfort. The other settled nearby, chirping softly, stretching its wings. Yuen felt a sense of peace, even with the massive dragons outside watching him. He knew that the night ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty, but he was ready to face it. This was more than just protecting the hatchlings. It was a moment of connection between humans and dragons. A chance to show that kindness and patience could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. Unrealized that this night would mark the beginning of something important, something that could change the way dragons and humans understood each other. And so, as the sun set and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Yuen sat quietly with the hatchlings, feeling their small, steady heartbeats against his chest. Outside, the red dragon pack remained watchful but calm. For the first time, a fragile peace had begun to form, a peace built on trust, patience, and the quiet courage to care for another being, no matter how powerful or different they were. The night was calm now, but the air was thick with anticipation. Un sat quietly in the cabin, the hatchlings nestled in his arms, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each gentle breath. Outside, the red dragon pack lingered, their eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. Massive forms outlined against the shadows of the forest. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, sensing the delicate moment between human and dragon. Yuen could feel the warmth of the hatchlings against his chest, and with it, a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the red dragon pack had been watching him all day, observing every movement, every word, and every action. Their presence was both intimidating and humbling. These were not creatures to be trifled with. They were intelligent, powerful, and deeply protective of their young. And yet here they were, waiting, not attacking, as if they were trying to understand him. He gently lifted one of the hatchlings, cradling it in his hands. Its wings were tiny and fragile, its eyes wide and curious as it looked at him. "I promise I will keep you safe," he whispered softly. "I won't let anything happen to you until your family comes for you," the hatchling chirped softly in response, curling into the warmth of his hands. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight that Un could feel deep in his heart, a trust that was rare and precious. Outside, Zareth, the leader of the red dragon pack, approached the cabin slowly. Her massive form moved with surprising grace, each step deliberate and careful. She lowered her head close to the doorway, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the scent of her hatchlings and the human who held them. Her amber eyes studied unintently, searching for any sign of deceit or danger. But Unan remained still, calm, and gentle, his hands steady as he held the hatchlings. For a long moment, Sareth simply watched. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the soft chirping of the hatchlings and the faint crackle of the fire. Yuen felt the weight of her gaze, but he did not flinch. He understood that this was a test not of strength, but of character. The dragons were trying to see if he could be trusted, if his intentions were pure, and he knew that any sudden movement or false step could ruin everything. One of the hatchlings stirred, lifting its tiny head and chirping softly. It looked toward Sareth, then back at Yuen, and finally nuzzled against his chest. The other hatchling followed suit, crawling closer to him. Yuen smiled gently, whispering words of comfort to them. "See? They're just watching," he said softly. "You're safe here," the hatchlings chirped again, tiny sounds of reassurance and trust. Ciri's eyes widened slightly. She had expected fear or aggression from humans, but here was a man who held her young with care, who spoke to them gently, and who remained calm under the intense gaze of the entire pack. Slowly, she lowered her massive head, nudging one of the hatchlings with her snout. The hatchling chirped softly but did not move away. It remained in Aaron's arms, seeking the warmth and protection only he could provide. The other dragons began to shift as well, their massive heads turning, wings folding slightly. They exchanged glances, as if communicating silently among themselves. The pack could sense that Aaron's intentions were genuine. He had not taken the hatchlings for his own gain. He had not harmed them. He had only provided safety, warmth, and care. And now, the pack was beginning to understand that their young were in good hands, at least for the moment. Yuen realized that this was a turning point. The moment was fragile, delicate, and full of potential. He had to continue showing patience, care, and understanding. Any sudden movement, any loud noise, or any sign of fear could undo the trust that had begun to form. He spoke softly to the hatchlings again, letting them know they were safe. "You're doing so well," he whispered. "Everything is okay. Just rest, little ones." Hours passed in this quiet balance. In fed the hatchlings small pieces of bread and berries, and they ate slowly but confidently. The red dragon pack remained outside, observing but not interfering. Their massive forms were tense but relaxed, wings folding slightly, eyes never leaving the cabin. Sereth remained close to the doorway, occasionally nudging her young gently. But she did not take them from Yuen. She seemed to be testing him, seeing if he could maintain the calm. Gentle care that had earned their tentative trust, unwatched carefully. Noting every movement of the dragons outside, he realized that the pack was not just powerful, they were intelligent, capable of understanding more than humans often gave them credit for. They could sense emotions, intentions, and even the subtle bond forming between him and the hatchlings. He had to honor that intelligence with his actions, his words, and his presence. As the sun began to set, casting warm orange and pink hues across the forest, Yuen felt a sense of cautious optimism. The hatchlings were calm, warm, and well-fed. The red dragon pack had not attacked, and their presence, while still imposing, had shifted from threatening to watchful. There was a sense of understanding beginning to form a fragile bridge between human and dragon. Built on patience, care, and trust, Yuen continued to speak softly to the hatchlings, his voice steady and gentle. "Your family is out there," he said. "They will come for you, and I will be here, keeping you safe until they do." The hatchlings chirped softly, as if acknowledging his words. One of them nuzzled against his chest again, tiny claws resting gently on his shirt. Yuen felt a deep warmth in his heart. A connection that went beyond words. Ciri's gaze softened slightly as she watched the scene. She could feel the truth in Aaron's actions, the sincerity in his heart, and the gentle strength he offered her young. Slowly she stepped back, allowing the hatchlings to remain in his care. The other dragons followed her lead, their massive bodies relaxing slightly. Wings folding more comfortably, heads lowering in a quiet display of cautious trust. For Yuen, the moment was profound. He had faced creatures far larger and stronger than himself, and yet he had not relied on fear or force. He had relied on patience, care, and understanding, and it had worked. The red dragon pack was beginning to see him not as a threat, but as a protector, someone worthy of their trust. Night fully settled over the forest, and Yuen placed the hatchlings back on the soft blankets near the fire. One crawled onto his chest again, seeking warmth, while the other nestled close by. He watched them carefully, speaking softly and reassuringly. The red dragon pack remained outside, close enough to observe, but not close enough to interfere. It was a tense but peaceful standoff, a moment of understanding that could easily be broken, but for now, held strong. Yuen reflected on the day's events, realizing that trust was not given lightly, whether between humans or dragons. It had to be earned, nurtured, and protected. He had earned a small measure of trust from one of the most powerful dragon packs in the forest, and he vowed to honor that trust with every action he took. He spent the rest of the evening watching the hatchlings, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest, and feeling the gentle weight of their tiny bodies against him. Every now and then, one would stir, stretch its wings, or chirp softly, and Yuen would respond with gentle words and a calm presence. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if recognizing the fragile peace that had been created within the cabin. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Anne realized that this night was only the beginning. The red dragon pack would remain near, observing, testing, and learning, and he would have to continue proving himself worthy of their trust. But for now, there was a quiet peace, a moment where understanding, patience, and care had bridged the gap between human and dragon. Yuen held the hatchlings, Close one last time before settling them comfortably on the blankets. He whispered softly, "You're safe. I'll keep you safe until your family comes." The hatchlings chirped softly in response, a sound full of trust and comfort. Outside, the red dragon pack remained watchful, but their stance had softened. The tense energy of earlier hours had shifted into something more hopeful, a beginning of understanding, connection, and finally allowed himself to rest. Sitting back near the fire and keeping one gentle hand on the hatchlings, the night was long, but for the first time, he felt that the bond he had formed with these tiny dragons and with their powerful pack was strong enough to endure. It was a night of quiet courage, patient care, the beginning of a trust that could change the way humans and dragons saw each other forever. The next morning, the forest was quiet and golden under the early sun, and woke slowly, stretching and listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside. The hatchlings were already awake, their tiny heads bobbing and wings stretching carefully. They chirped softly, exploring the blankets and the small cabin, and Yuen smiled at their curiosity. He had grown attached to them in ways he had never expected. The trust in him was no longer fragile, it had become real and strong. Outside, the red dragon pack had not left. Their massive forms were scattered around the cabin, some perched on rocks, others standing quietly among the trees. Sereth, the leader, remained close to the cabin doorway, her amber eyes studying every movement with quiet intelligence. She had spent the night observing Yuen and the hatchlings. Watching the gentle care he provided, and her confidence in him had grown. She could see that he had nothing but good intentions, and that the hatchlings were safe with him. Yuen carefully lifted one of the hatchlings, cradling it in his hands. Its tiny wings fluttered slightly, and it chirped happily at him. "Good morning," he said softly. "You slept well, didn't you? Let's have a nice day today." The hatchling chirped again and nuzzled into his chest, tiny claws resting gently against him. Warmth spread through his heart. He had never felt such a deep connection with any creature before, and now he understood why dragons were considered so extraordinary, not just for their strength, but for their intelligence, their family bonds, and their ability to recognize trust. Sereth stepped closer to the cabin, her massive claws making soft impressions in the soil. She lowered her head, nudging the hatchling gently. The baby chirped but did not pull away, staying in Aaron's arms. Un held it carefully, whispering softly, "See? They just want to check on you. You're safe here." Ciri's eyes softened, and for the first time, Yuen felt that the leader was not just observing him, but acknowledging him. It was an acceptance, quiet but profound. The other dragons began to shift, wings folding, heads lowering slightly. They communicated with each other in subtle gestures, a language of glances, nudges, and movements that Yuan could not fully understand, but he could sense its meaning. They were no longer tense, no longer poised for attack. They were curious, watchful, and beginning to trust. And that trust, unrealized, had been earned by his calm, patient care, and his respect for the hatchlings. He decided it was time to allow the hatchlings to meet their family. Carefully, he stepped toward the doorway, holding both hatchlings securely. They chirped softly, but they did not resist. An spoke gently to Sereth. "I think they're ready to see you. They trust you and they know you love them. I'll bring them closer." Sereth lowered her head even more, inviting him forward. The other dragons spread slightly, creating space for him to step out. Un felt the morning sun on his face, the warmth of the forest, and the immense power of the red dragon pack surrounding him, but he did not feel fear. He felt calm, confident, in the connection that had been formed and respectful of the dragon's intelligence and strength. He approached Sereth slowly, holding the hatchlings gently. One of them chirped and lifted its tiny head, and to his surprise, it crawled forward on its own toward Sereth. The leader lowered her massive head and nudged it gently with her snout. The hatchling chirped happily, circling her before returning briefly to Aaron's arms. The other hatchling followed, and soon both were moving confidently between the human and the dragon leader. Yuen felt a deep sense of relief and joy. He had feared that the pack might never accept him, that his efforts might be misunderstood. But here, in the soft morning light, he saw that patience, care, and gentle actions had bridged the gap between human and dragon. The bond he had formed with the hatchlings had extended to the entire pack. Sereth lowered her head fully now, her massive eyes meeting Aaron's. It was a silent moment, but one full of understanding. She was acknowledging him not just as someone who had cared for her young, but as someone worthy of respect and trust. Yuen bowed his head slightly, holding the hatchlings close, whispering, "Thank you for trusting me." The leader's eyes softened further. Une felt a quiet peace settle over the clearing. The other dragons stepped closer as well, circling gently around the cabin and observing. Unrealized that the pack was not just powerful, they were intelligent, capable of understanding actions, emotions, and intentions. They could sense that he had only acted with kindness and care, and now they were beginning to accept him. It was an extraordinary moment, a quiet miracle of trust and understanding between species. As the morning progressed, Yuen continued to interact with the hatchlings and the dragons. He allowed the young ones to explore Sereth's side of the clearing, chirping and playing while he watched closely to ensure their safety. The pack moved gracefully around them, wings folded but alert, communicating silently among themselves. Unmarveled at their coordination, their intelligence, the subtle ways they expressed care for their young. The hatchlings chirped happily, exploring both their human caretaker and their dragon family. They climbed gently over Aaron's arms, fluttered their tiny wings, and nudged Sereth and the other dragons. Ian spoke softly, reassuring them, guiding their movements, and ensuring they were safe. The red dragon pack responded in kind, gently nudging the hatchlings, allowing them to explore while maintaining a watchful eye. Hours passed in this gentle interaction. The sun climbed higher, warming the forest, the cabin, and the clearing. Un began to feel that the bond he had formed with the hatchlings and the red dragon pack was permanent. The dragons were no longer tense or wary. They were calm, curious, and accepting. And the hatchlings had fully integrated this new connection, trusting both their human caretaker and their dragon family. At one point, Sereth nudged Un gently with her massive snout. It was a small gesture, but it carried what a recognition of his role in caring for her young and a silent invitation to be part of their world. Yuen smiled softly, stroking one of the hatchlings gently. He realized that he had become more than a caretaker. He had become a bridge between the dragons and humans, someone who could be trusted by both. The pack began to move around the clearing, forming a protective circle. Yuen stayed within the circle, holding the hatchlings and speaking softly to them. They chirped, explored, and even played gently, showing confidence and joy in the presence of both their human and dragon family. It was a perfect moment of harmony, union of trust, care, and understanding. As the day drew on, Una knew it was time to let the hatchlings spend more time with their dragon family. He placed them gently on the ground near Sereth, allowing them to walk and explore while he stayed close. The hatchlings moved confidently, chirping and fluttering their wings, while the pack guided them with gentle nudges and careful observation. In watched, feeling pride and joy swell within him. Sereth approached him once more, lowering her head and letting him feel her warm breath on his face. It was a gesture of acceptance, trust, and acknowledgement. Un bowed slightly, whispering, "Thank you. I will always respect your family and your trust." The leader's eyes softened, and the pack around them shifted slightly, wings folding, heads lowering. A quiet sign that the moment of full trust had arrived. From that day forward, Yuen became a part of the Red Dragon Pack's extended family. The hatchlings continued to grow under his care and the guidance of their dragon family. He would bring them food, keep them safe, and allow them to explore, always respecting their boundaries and the wisdom of their pack. The dragons visited him often, leaving small gifts, guiding him through the forest, and sharing moments of quiet connection. The bond between human and dragon had been forged not through fear, force, or dominance, but through patience, kindness, and genuine care. Once realized that this was the beginning of a new understanding between their worlds of trust that could endure, grow, and teach both humans and dragons that compassion could overcome fear. And every night, without fail, the hatchlings would curl up on Aaron's chest as they slept, feeling warmth, safety, and love. Outside, the Red Dragon Pack would watch over them, confident in their trust, knowing that the human had proven himself worthy. It was a peace born of courage, patience, and the quiet power of kindness, a bond that would last for years to come. Shaping the lives of dragons and humans alike, Yuen smiled as he held the hatchlings close. The forest bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to such an extraordinary connection. And yet, here it was, a bond of trust, understanding, and love that had bridged the gap between two very different worlds. He knew that he would never forget this day, this moment, or the incredible creatures who had become his family in ways both unexpected and profound.